Hello, welcome back to the channel. We left off the last video with our front brake lines needing to be modified. Ended up taking them in, had about 12 inches cut off the length of them, new banjo fittings pressed on, ready to go, have them all mounted up and run. They fit much better. Don't have a ton of excess line inside the frame, but have plenty of line obviously for all movement of suspension and our tires, and as well as our handlebars. So have them installed, they're ready to be bled. We have our radiator shrouds installed, have our radiator guard. This is from BVC Racing, it's an item they make. Fits great on this aluminum radiator. It's meant for most aftermarket radiators as well as OEM. Fits good. We got our exhaust all securely mounted and installed. Ended up, previous video, I was also talking about the case saver. Ended up going with an aluminum case saver from BDT Racing. Really happy with this. Fits perfectly, nice and secure and solid, very well made. As well as none of the modifications that had been done to my case, or I should say actually repairs, interfered with it at all. And that was one of my main concerns with one of the larger poly units. We have our reed cage installed on the motor, ready to go. Next step is, besides bleeding the brakes, is going to be to get our carb and intake boot installed, our throttle cable hooked up, and then we have our fuel tank and petcock assembly that we'll be able to put on. And then we should be about ready to get this bike started. Over here we have our 38mm Air Striker carb. This is an OEM intake boot that was just stretched to fit the 38mm intake, or a 38mm opening on the carb. So we're going to go ahead and get that installed as well. I think we're going to go ahead and start with bleeding our brakes. Going to get this open so I can add some .4 fluid and we can start bleeding the front brakes. All right, got our master cylinder opened up. Going to add fluid to it. Decided to take the front tires off. It looks like you could do it with the front tires on, but I figured it would just be easier and hopefully less mess. Have my bleeding system on. Have that valve opened, that bleeder opened. The one on this side is closed. Going to go ahead and put some fluid in. Go ahead and pump it through to at least start to get fluid. Then I'm going to come over to this side, get the air out and at least get some fluid, and then I'll come back and bleed all the air bubbles. I just want to get the lines as full of fluid as I can initially. All right, brakes are all bled and back together. Did ultimately end up having to use my pneumatic brake bleeder, which actually, will then literally, it attaches on by the caliper and will suck the air out using, air pressure from my air compressor. That actually worked the best to really draw out any of the air bubbles, especially in the rear where you have this loop where your brake line comes up, loops around, and then goes back down. That loop can be a problem area where you can get air bubbles stuck up there. Worked really well with the pneumatic air bleeder. Was very quick with that part. If you were to try and do it manually with just pumping the lever, it was going to take a long time. Anyway, brakes work well. Everything spins freely and got nice pedal. Got great pedal, great lever pressure. Nice tight lever. And brakes appear to work good. Next step, I believe we're going to move to. So I want to go ahead and start getting the carburetor, the intake boot in place, and get the throttle cable attached to the top of the carburetor. Now, when we do that, what I'm probably initially going to do is set the carburetor in place. Or actually, I'm going to take the top off the carburetor, get the cable attached to the carburetor's top. Then I'll install the carburetor and intake boot, put the top back in the carburetor with the slide and the cable attached, adjust it to make sure that the slide is releasing completely and opening completely, and then get the boot installed on the airbox and get everything clamped in. And then once the carburetor's in, the last step will be to get our fuel tank installed, and then we should be ready to go ahead and start this bike. Okay, took the top off the carburetor, pulled our spring out. This is the piece that locks the cable to the slide. As you can see, that groove there, just like you kind of have with your clutch lever or the other end of the throttle cable. You got the little bullet that's going to attach in there, and then the cable will run up through. Then that will be screwed into the slide securely. But you have to put that cable on there and have it fished through this spring as well, and the cap as well. So it can be a little tricky to get all those pieces in order. So I'm going to put the camera down and go ahead and get that together, and I'll come back and show you what it looks like when it's properly assembled. Okay, so first step is going to be to put the fastening piece back in there, because you would not be able to put the spring, the cable through the spring, through the lid, through the spring, attach it to that bullet, and then be able to screw it in place. The spring fits right over top of that. But the trick is going to be, once you have this secured inside your slide, the trick is going to be fitting this through the cap, through the spring, compressing the spring enough that you can fish this bullet down into the bottom of that slide, that groove, and hook it into this piece here. Now, once you have it in there, the spring pressure will keep it engaged with the lid, and then the lid will be locked up against this, and then that obviously is what pushes your slide back down when you release your throttle. So we're going to go ahead and get that attached. Okay, this is how I'm doing mine. Slip the cap on, tuck the spring up, and then use a pair of needle nose vice grips just gently locked onto the cable to hold the spring up. But I've got a little over an inch of cable sticking out, which will be just enough that I can then stick that down there and hook it on there, and then release the vice grips and lock it into place. And there we go. Our slide is connected to our throttle cable, and obviously if you pull up on this, you're gonna see the spring will compress. So now I can bring the carburetor and the boot over. We can get that into place. We can get the carburetor installed onto here. I'd like to get the slide in and then be able to look down the intake boot just to make sure that it's opening and closing fully before we, seal everything up. Okay, put the slide back in the carburetor. Had to adjust my cable out. Before I even installed the carburetor, I was able to check it, make sure that it was opening completely. But have run into another issue. Our boot is securely mounted on our air box, on our carburetor, not reaching the carburetor here with the intake boot. When I bought this cylinder, it came with the reed cage and this intake boot and the spacer. What I didn't realize is that intake boot is actually from a CR250. And it can be used on a TRX250, obviously, especially if you're not using the aftermarket or the OEM box, and you're just putting a tailpiece with the air filter right off of the carburetor. So you can use that, but in this application, I'm not going to be able to. I won't reach the carburetor. So I need to take this intake boot off, this reed spacer out, take the reed cage out, and get a UPP 38 millimeter for the oversized carb intake boot, which will have a different angle on it and is longer. You'll see how, let me see if I can get it you can see how the boot does not match up angle-wise with the carburetor. So it will fit properly, and then we'll be able to complete the installation of the carburetor and the intake. So have to get one of those, and then we'll be back. All right, so we are back, and we have UPP 38 millimeter intake. This will have the proper angle as well as length to be able to reach the carburetor. And also ordered a set of V-Force 3 reeds. So I'm going to replace the factory reed cage with the V-Force reeds. These are V-Force 3. I've always used V-Force 2 reeds in the past. Last build I did was about 12, 13 years ago. The V-Force 3s actually were coming out then, but you pretty much can't get V-Force 2 reeds anymore. I mean, you can get replacement reeds, but to get the whole reed cage unless you find one used. So we're going to go with the 3s. Going to go ahead and get that installed. Got some new gaskets. Excuse me. So I'm going to go ahead and take the intake I have on off, the reed cage out, the spacer out, and we're going to get these installed so we can get that carburetor put in place. Okay, intake, reed cage, all installed. Carburetor fit right in. Slides. It's awfully nice how easy it goes together when you have the right size boot. The angle on it matches up perfectly with the carburetor. So everything is in place. Vent lines are all run. Next step is we're going to go ahead and get our fuel tank on and get our fuel line hooked up. And the fuel tank is on. Very tight fit. I don't know if it's because it's a Clark tank, but boy, getting these bolts in after you get the front bolt in, very tight fit. But got it in place, got the petcock in, got our fuel line into our carburetor, have our vent lines all run down, coming out the bottom. We have a crankcase vent in there as well. That's the clear hose, as you can see right there in front of the carburetor. So we are, well, it is, this thing should be ready to run. I should be able to put some fuel in this, get some coolant in the radiator, and we should be able to go ahead and give this a kickstart and see if we can get it started, see how it runs. So we're going to end this video here. We will be back. There will be videos coming, obviously. We'll have a first start video coming once I get some coolant and some fuel in this. Thank you very much for watching. Hope everyone's enjoying watching the build and following the build. If anyone else is doing a build like this, I hope this is helping you out if needed. Thank you very much. Have a great day.